rezoning of approximately 5.59 acres of land. Let's go ahead and start with a roll call, please.
Felix Rivera.
Present.
John Weddleton.
Here.
Jamie Allard.
Here.
Christopher Constant. Forrest Dunbar.
Here.
Crystal Kennedy is excused. Suzanne LaFrance.
Here.
Cameron Perez Verdilla. Pete Peterson.
Present.
And Meg Zalatel also asked to be excused. You have a quorum.
Great, thank you. As usual, if members want to get in the queue, please put yourself in the chat or text me if you can't access the chat. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to the administration for our presentation today.
Great, thank you, Mr. Rivera. Dave Whitfield, Planning Department, current planning manager. With me is Carol Wong, Long Range Planning Manager, and I just saw Mr. Sean Debenham, property owner, enter the meeting as well. This is a proposal to rezone part of an existing R4 multifamily residential district in the Midtown area to B3 General Business District and R4 multifamily residential district with special limitations. The applicant is proposing a special limitation to the existing R4 district, which would require a minimum of 32 dwelling units per acre. The proposed rezoning area includes most of the existing South Park Estates mobile home park, which was established in the 1950s and 60s and consists of approximately 66 residences. The surrounding zoning districts are predominantly high-density residential and commercial districts. The properties involved in this rezoning represent 3 designations in the Anchorage 2040 land use plan: the city center, Main Street corridor, and urban residential high. Carol Wong from Long Range Planning is going to give you a brief overview of each one of these designations. Carol?
Good afternoon. This is Carol Wong with the Long Range Planning Division. Yes, so Mr. Debenham's 3 different blocks involved in this rezone have each their own land use designation. Starting with block 6, that is highlighted in purple, which is our city center designation, but also overlaid on this are 3 other factors actually going on. There's this white stipple pattern, which is for residential mixed use, is another designation. The traditional neighborhood design, which is not seen on this map, but circles the larger area of Midtown, recognizes the small block pattern. These are not super blocks, and so it's recognized that these blocks are walkable and should be have a good pattern for supporting sidewalk improvements as well as bike paths. And then the other is the transit supportive development corridor along Benson and Arctic Boulevard, and that is seen in the cross hatch marks, recognizing that there are bus service on Benson and Arctic Boulevard. And so areas within quarter to half mile of those corridors should be also encouraged to have good pedestrian access to make use of those transit services. So the next block that he has is that Main Street corridor, which is the pink, looks like a medium brown here in this map with the hatch mark along Arctic for block 9. And that Main Street corridor is recognizing that area is could be used for a mix of commercial serving the neighborhood as well as residential could be a mix in that display in that block as well. Also going on there is the transit-oriented hatch mark for recognizing transit on Arctic Boulevard. And the last one is that center block Block 10, which is the darker brown, and that is urban residential high. This is seen as an area that could be developed with higher density multifamily uses on that block. And that also, because of its distance to the transit serving corridors, is also hatched mark, as well as it's in the traditional neighborhood area of being within walkable blocks. So those are the land use designations from the 2040 plan.
Thank you very much, Carol. Appreciate that. Planning believes that the primary benefit of this rezoning to the public health, safety, and welfare of the people of the municipality of Anchorage would be allowing the development of high-density housing options in new commercial spaces in a horizontal mixed-use environment at the intersection of, as Carol pointed out, two transit-supportive development corridors. This rezoning at first glance does not appear to conform to the Anchorage 2040 land use plan. The expanded B3 general business districts are proposed for locations where the Anchorage 2040 land use plan designations would normally call for R3A mixed use residential district or R4A multifamily mixed use residential district. This inconsistency raises two issues: the loss of housing and a lack of design standards for a pedestrian-oriented mixed-use environment. To mitigate the potential loss of housing through this rezoning, the applicant has proposed special limitations that would require at least 32 dwelling units per acre for development within the proposed R4 SL zoning district in the interior of this site. This would recover the losses from the new B3 zones while ensuring a minimum level of additional residential density that would have been provided by the existing R4 district. Including this special limitation for minimum residential density on the proposed R4 SL zone is recommended. The land use designations of the underlying rezoning area would require walkable, pedestrian-oriented environments. The implementing zoning districts for the rezoning area's underlying land use designations have design standards that require this type of environment. The proposed B3 zones do not have this requirement. In order for the proposed rezoning to comply with the 2040 land use plan, development in the proposed B3 zones must be required to adhere to the pedestrian-oriented design standards that provide a quality horizontal mixed-use environment in the rezoning area. This can be achieved by requiring an administrative site plan review for development in those B3 zones that checks for compliance with site-specific shared infill design principles as outlined in the Anchorage 2040 land use plan as adapted for this particular rezoning area. Applying a site-specific selection of the shared infill design principles to the proposed B3 zones through an administrative site plan review is recommended as a special limitation. As originally proposed by the applicant, the zoning extends a land use pattern that is inconsistent with the comprehensive plan. However, the proposed special limitations on the B3 and R4 zones will ensure that the rezoning is in fact consistent with the rezoning. And with that, the planning department recommends approval of this rezoning with the special limitations as outlined in the ordinance. I believe that Mr. Debenham is here. Carol Wong and myself would be happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
Great, thank you. All right, let's go ahead. Actually, Mr. Debenham, before we go on, did you want to say anything before we get to questions?
I don't think so, but I'm more than happy to answer any questions that you might have. I think Dave and Carol did a good job kind of explaining why we did what we did. I would say just kind of make the comment that This was kind of an iterative process for us that took quite a few meetings, and I think in the end we were able to accomplish kind of a win-win zoning change for everybody. So I feel good about it.
And Mr. Rivera, if I could comment just really quickly on what Mr. Debenham said. The planning department has worked with Mr. Debenham for the better part of a year on this rezoning to find, you know, a rezoning that, in our minds, furthers the goals and policies of the comprehensive plan and complies with the designations as outlined in the comp plan. So it has been a long process, but we feel like this is an appropriate zoning proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to go ahead and go through the queue, starting with Mr. Dunbar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So really for anyone involved in this, I think I might have misunderstood something you said. So there was a mention of 66 units of mobile home capacity on one of the lots. And then the description was, well, the rezone will lead to 32 units. That's a special limitation. Is that on a different one of the lots, or are we replacing the 66 units with the 32 units?
The interior, Mr. Dunbar, the interior of the site is currently developed with a mobile home park. It's I believe Mr. Debenham's intent to redevelop the site. The 32 dwelling unit or dwelling unit per acre requirement as a special limitation is to offset the rezoning to B3 around the periphery of the site and move that density to the interior of the site to offset what we would have gotten in density along that periphery.
Okay, so let me ask a follow-up on that then, because I'm still not quite understanding. So regardless of the rezone, Mr. Debenham has the right and the intention to redevelop the mobile home park. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so the 32 units are on the other lots and are additional to whatever units you are going to redevelop onto the mobile home property. Is that correct?
What we've done is we've taken the units that would have been lost by rezoning from R4 along the periphery to B3 and moved it interior to the site so that we have achieved the overall density of that particular area. Correct.
So how many units will end up where the 66 units used to be?
It's hard to say exactly how. We're talking about density versus number of units. It's hard to say exactly how many units could be achieved there in the end. However, he is required to meet the minimum 32 dwelling units per acre, net acre.
You know, I apologize. I'm still not quite understanding this, I don't think. So, you know, let me let the other folks in the queue, maybe their questions will clarify it a little more for me. Thank you.
My apologies, Mr. Dunbar.
Thanks. Mr. Whittleton?
Well, I have a number of points, but let's follow up on that because that's one of them. So you have 32 DUA. Is that applied to the 5.59? So we have 160 units squeezed into that R4?
No, the 32 DUA would only be applied to the interior block of the zoning for the R4. So basically what we're moving what could have been residential along the periphery of the site and moving that to the interior of the site to get a minimum density. So basically to offset the density that we would have had along both Arctic and Benson.
And that R4 lot is probably something roughly 2 acres. So we're talking 64. The 32 DUA times 2 acres would be 64. Is that what we're looking at?
I believe so, but maybe Mr. Debenham would know exactly what the acreage is.
Yeah, and I don't know who's controlling the meeting, but I could share possibly a map that might provide a bit more understanding of what we're trying to do and answer Mr. Dunbar's question.
Mr. Debenham, you're welcome to take over. I can stop sharing my screen if you'd like.
Okay. see if I can do this correctly. Hopefully everybody can kind of see this PDF that I've pulled up. But
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, so just to kind of be clear what we're proposing to do, the real rezone that we're trying to do here is we're trying to rezone this block here, which is the almost 2 acres on Benson Boulevard. We're trying to rezone that from R4 to B3 SL. And then we're trying to rezone half of this Arctic Boulevard 2 acre lot from R4 to B3 SL. So currently this half here, which is the half of this block on Arctic, is already B3, and then the interior 2 acres is already R4. And so what we've done, or what we've come up as a compromise in order to rezone the full kind of 2 acres on Benson and then half of the 2 acres that's on Arctic to B3, is we said, hey, let's include this other portion that's already B3, let's include that in the special limitations. And then let's also grab this other B interior R4 lot and add some special limitations to that as well. So that's why you see a rezone of almost 6 acres there. It's because in order to kind of offset rezoning these 2 acres from R4 to B3, we needed to add some acreage to add the SLs to. And so in answer to Mr. Dunbar's question, what we've done is we've said, okay, this interior 2 acres here, although it's R4 right now, we're going to add special limitations that say that the special limitation requires 32 dwelling units per acre. And this interior 2 acres here is essentially 2 acres. So that's like 64 units of a requirement. And then that would allow the peripheral lots to be developed either as commercial or mixed use or just residential. So hopefully that kind of sheds a bit of a light on it, and I haven't muddied the waters.
I'll just comment for myself. That is very clarifying. I think John's point was clarifying for me. I was conflating 32 units for the interior lot to 32 units per acre. And if it's a 2 acre lot, then I see how you're achieving the same level of density.
Okay.
Well, greater density, but similar number of units. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. I'll go ahead.
Felix, I have more if there's chance,
Yeah.
but I don't mind waiting if you have people in the queue.
Go ahead, John. Go ahead, Mr. Welton.
Okay, I see benefits in this, so I'm just kind of poking around it and trying to understand and compare with some other things we've done. Now, recently we rejected a rezone on Tudor that is property that is residential, and he proposed to put storage on there and wanted it to be changed to B3. And we rejected that, and one is because the land use plan, fairly new, wanted to retain it as residential. We need more residential. That was one of our findings. And then also I think a point was made, anyway, so we rejected that, and that's on a very busy road. Whereas I think part of the discussion here said, well, those aren't good places for residential because, the parts that would change the B3 SL aren't good places for residential because they're by busy roads. But here we rejected one that's on a very, very, Tudor roads, probably busier. I don't know if it's busier than Northern Lights. It's far busier than Arctic. So it seems like we're inconsistent, and I'm a little worried that, I'm worried about the inconsistency. Can someone address that?
Mr. Weddleton, I think I can address that. I mean, I think the importance of residential, is evident in this particular rezoning as it was in the rezoning that you mentioned. The difference here is that we're taking what would have been the residential density along the periphery of the site, along Arctic and Benson, and we're moving it interior. So, from a density perspective, we're not necessarily losing units. Whereas with the other rezoning on DeBar, I don't believe that they were proposing residential units that would have met the requirements that the comp plan was looking for. So for those reasons, we weren't able to support that rezoning. So I think the difference here is that we are making up the density, the residential units, by moving them to the interior of the site, whereas the previous rezoning wasn't proposing that at all.
Okay. Can I continue, Felix, or?
Yeah, go ahead. One more.
Okay. Okay. And then I'll have one more after that, but that's fine. I'm happy to wait. So we're not doing a change to the land use plan with this. Like we've seen, we have other stuff coming at us and we would change it. And this, I want to make sure we're justified doing that. And I think in the discussion you say, well, we effectively get there, because of the special limitations. We, looking at the whole project, meet the goals of the land use plan. And that may be true, but I'd like to see it either change the land use plan, which we can do, or bolster that a bit, because it seems like now it's just kind of a narrative. We kind of think it works. And I don't know if, Dave, does that section on alternative equivalent compliance, would that apply here at all? At least refer to some part of code and say, this part of code allows us to do this, and here's our reasons. I didn't see anything hooked on code.
Mr. Whittleton, I don't believe alternative equivalent compliance would work in this situation. And you're right. I mean, this is a situation where we recognize that maybe the proposed development here, rezoning, is consistent with the 2040 plan only through special limitations. And that's how we were able to arrive at this compromise. But without the special limitations, it doesn't. So, I mean, I can clearly see what your point is. But I think that we, over the last year of working with Mr. Debenham, have come up with a plan that we believe is consistent and conforms to the comprehensive plan.
Okay. When I got that from the write-up, I'm just nervous. It just doesn't feel tethered to anything solid, that's like code says we can do this. And
well, I think if we actually amend the comprehensive plan, we might be setting ourselves up for, problems in the future. So if we were to change the comp plan to say that B3 or that commercial was consistent, or I should say was appropriate entirely around the periphery without, making up the units, we might be setting ourselves up for a problem. So that's why we opted not to amend the comp plan, but rather achieve the consistency with the comp plan through the special limitations. So I completely understand where you're coming from, and we struggled with that as well. I'm sure that Carol can speak to that, or even Mr. Debenham. It was a challenge, but I think in this particular case, we ended up in a situation that we feel comfortable we can move forward with.
okay, let me try to rephrase that to see if I got it right. So were we to have a companion piece that changed the land use plan, there's a fear that any justification of those changes would kind of set a precedent that would kind of have other residential land in Midtown or wherever kind of topple for the same reasons.
Possibly, yes.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thanks, and I'll put you back in the queue, Mr. Weddleton, so you can ask your other questions. I want to note for the record, we've been joined by Mr. Constant. Okay, so I'm next in the queue. So a few questions from me. First is, did we receive any comments from the Midtown Community Council or any of the adjacent community councils?
I believe we received one comment from Community Council. I'll have to check Mr. Rivera to see if it was Midtown.
Okay, thank you. Then the second is, can you please remind me what our current land use plan says about mobile home parks?
Carol, can you speak to that? If I'm not sure that the comp plan speaks to mobile home parks, but if it does, I suspect you'll know.
The plan recognizes that mobile homes are a form of housing, and it provides housing for those that need that income, with that income level to be served. I know that in this instance, Mr. Debenham, as units have come vacant, he has taken it upon himself to not fill it. Or if it is rented out again, he lets them know that it's not for long term. And then he's also offered help in them finding housing. So if you have specific questions about how he's taking care of the tenants that are there in this mobile home area, he can answer those. But the plan recognizes that mobile homes are a form of housing that, if it's still useful, then it should be maintained. But many of our mobile home parks were built during the oil boom, and this type of housing, unless it's kept up and the infrastructure underneath it is kept up, they become hazards and safety issues.
Great. That's actually a perfect segue to the third question I have, and then I will put myself back in the queue to ask any remaining questions I have. So, Mr. Debenham, since you're with us, and thank you for joining us, can you speak a little bit to some of the transition that Carol referred to and how you are helping the residents of the mobile home park?
Absolutely, certainly. So I just add that the reason why we're doing what we're doing and kind of looking to the next iteration of the life of this property is that this particular mobile home park was built in the late 50s, early 60s, and the water and sewer lines and the infrastructure of the park are crumbling to the extent that the DEC is requiring us to take all the trailers off and put in new water and sewer and storm drain and all the infrastructure in, and then put the trailers back on, and that's not possible, because once we take the trailers off, they're grandfathered in now, but once we take them off, we won't be able to put them back on in their current iteration. So we're actually being forced to do this, and so we've put it off for probably 10 years. When the DEC kind of first approached us, and we're putting about $20,000 to $50,000 a year in infrastructure costs in it. So the things that we've done to help our tenants are, number one, we've continually informed them. 10 years ago, we informed them and said, hey, the infrastructure starting to fail. We're going to be redeveloping this in the future. And then as we've approached now this kind of next milestone in our redevelopment process, which is the rezoning of this property, we've approached them, we've let them know, informed them, said, hey, the next probably 3 to 5 years, we're going to be redeveloping. Some of our tenants have opted to leave, and as they've left, we've purchased their trailers from them, and then they've left, and then we've gone ahead and demoed those trailers. And that's a standing order kind of with our tenants, that if they want to take it with them, that's fine. If they want to leave it there and have us just buy it and demo it, that's fine too. But that's kind of a standing order there. And then eventually, in the next 3 to 4 or 5 years, we will do the final kind of push off of the trailers and move those, and we'll have to figure out some management plan for that to help our tenants in that as well.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Debenham. And on behalf of my constituents, I really appreciate you taking that responsibility seriously and helping folks to transition. Okay, I'll go ahead and go back in the queue. Mr. Weddleton?
All right, thanks. There's a number of subsidies that are likely available here. If it's on the transit corridor, you could do speaking of Mr. Debenham, the kind of the workforce housing and get property tax and so on. And can you tell me, maybe Mr. Whitfield or Debenham, what subsidies are available, and will they influence the type of housing you build?
Mr. Whittleton, I'll defer to Mr. Debenham there.
Yeah, I won't make Dave answer that one. So right now there is the property tax abatement, which will help for sure. But this property is a little ways off still from being able to redevelop. The problem that we have, if I showed you the map again, it has 3 blocks, and every block is surrounded by roads, and almost every road has to be completely redone. Curb, gutter, water, sewer, storm, power lights, everything needs to be done for the infrastructure just surrounding the lots. And so you're talking about millions of dollars in infrastructure improvements before you even put a shovel in the ground to put housing on the lot. So we plan to continue to work with the municipality of Anchorage on how to do the infrastructure on that. And I'm confident if we could kind of solve that puzzle, that we can continue to put housing there. That's what our firm does. We do housing. We're doing the downtown project this summer, breaking ground here in a few months, and we're excited about that. And we're excited to continue to provide housing here in Anchorage.
Okay, so there's some, is the transit supportive corridor subsidy, is that the only one that's available here?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, and I think your answer was you're not sure if you'll use that or not. You have to see how things pencil.
Oh, if we move forward, we'll for sure take advantage of that, but it doesn't get us all the way there. I believe you've had some presentations on kind of the gap between construction costs for multifamily housing versus the value of multifamily housing, and that the property tax abatement definitely takes a chunk out of that, but it doesn't take a very large chunk out of it.
Okay, if I could, one last, so that if makes me maybe it's reality, I suppose. I'm nervous about the reality here. You could do the rezone, and you're clearing off the trailers as as people move and so on. So it could be that the commercial will be built along Arctic and Northern Lights or Benson, and then but the housing may not be built. Is that correct? Or maybe not for a very, very, very long time.
Well, I don't really do commercial we own commercial buildings, but we don't really do commercial development. Our kind of bread and butter is residential. Like I said, we're doing the downtown development, 58 units of housing downtown. We did another 54 units of housing over off Northwood and Raspberry. We did 2 developments there, each 27 units. So, what we do is residential housing, and it's my desire and goal to put residential housing there. It's a great spot. It's in Midtown. Midtown's hasn't seen residential housing in tens of years. So it's a great place. The park's a little bit rough right now, but I'm confident that as we redevelop our trailer park and work with municipality, it will be able to really make that a focal point that'll be nice for tenants to move in that area. And that interior acres, it with these new SLs, it'll have a requirement of 32 dwelling units per acre, and that doesn't go away. Even if for some reason there was commercial on Arctic and Benson, there's still that requirement for 2 acres of land to be that residential of 32 dwelling units per acre. And I just with nice new commercial development, a nice new park there. I mean, to me, it just reeks of a great place to have some residential housing.
Okay, so what are your plans for the B3 though? I mean, most of this area will be B3. Are you going to sell that then, or?
That's a good question. So we don't know yet because the commercial isn't what we do all the time. But there's obviously along Benson where you have all those cars are going a zillion miles an hour. It's not a great place to have residential. So that will more than likely end up being commercial. The better question is what to do about the 2 acres on Arctic. And what I'd really like to do is kind of more of a mixed use potential development there, to try to bring more of the residential from the interior 2 acres and bring it in so that's closer to the park. But that's just something that we'll have to figure out as we kind of move forward. Our first kind of step is to get the land rezoned so we know what parameters we're kind of working under, then get it replatted, and there's quite a bit of contamination here at this park, so we'd have to remove, I think it's 6 or 8 trailers and remove those and get the contamination remediated, and then really kind of zero in on kind of a grander master plan of the area and what we want to do.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yes, honey.
Great, thank you. All right, so
I'm on the conference call right now.
Oh, I'm going to go ahead and put myself back in the queue, or I am in the queue. I'm going to ask folks, if you're not speaking, to please make sure that you're muted. Okay, so jumping off of something that Mr. Weddleton stated about property tax abatements and other forms of relief, I'm wondering if the administration, and I don't see Mr. Schutte on the call, so hopefully maybe someone else will have the answer, knows where we are with implementing, I forget the technical name for it, but areas of property tax relief or other forms of relief similar to what was pioneered downtown. We had
like deteriorated property.
Thanks. Pioneering those, that was downtown, and we had talked about doing the same thing, creating those same types of zones in I think in Midtown and some in West Anchorage. Do we know where we are with that, and would this be one of those areas that would qualify? If no one from the administration can speak to that, it looks like Mr. Constant can, so go ahead.
Interesting in timing. A project that I didn't mention this morning is I am working on a review and renewal of that deteriorated property tax abatement program, because it's coming on 10 years pretty soon, 7 or so years. And so now would be a good time to engage in that conversation on that project. And I'm working with Mr. Schutte and a number of other people, but we hadn't yet made it ready for prime time, but clearly would be welcome to have you in that conversation.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Constant. I think that's an important conversation to keep moving forward because, as Mr. Debenham stated, Midtown hasn't seen residential development in quite a while, the Midtown core, and it's something that I know my constituents and my neighbors are asking for. So appreciate Mr. Debenham's efforts. Did you have anything else, Mr. Constant?
Yeah, actually, just out of an abundance of kind of transparency, across Benson, diagonal, abutting right next to Carl's Jr. there, one lot in, is an Aquila property. It's where we have our residential program. And I don't see a conflict, but maybe others do. It's across the street. There would be no value increase to that property because it's a pretty unique use. And also the Aquila main office is 2 blocks up, but we have one that's diagonal and one lot over from the very northern edge of the trailer park property.
Thank you. I don't see any conflict for this work session, but I would go ahead and declare that conflict at the assembly meeting, and then I'll make a formal ruling on it.
Or declare the potential of a conflict, because, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, any other discussion?
Mr. Rivera, just to go back to your question, your first question to me about whether or not the Midtown Community Council submitted comments, it looks like comments came in from the Spenard Community Council, but not Midtown. At least that's what I have in my my folder here. So.
Okay. Can you remind me what the Spenard Community Council had to say, Mr. Whitfield?
Well, I'd have to go through it here. Margaret Oth was the one that made the comments. And I would be willing to bet that Mr. Debenham knows exactly what she had to say if he'd like to speak to it. Otherwise, I can take a look here.
Sure. And I guess no need to belabor it if we don't have it right now. But Mr. Debenham, did you want to speak to it?
Yeah, I can speak to that. I would also like to say that I went to the Midtown Community Council and did a presentation there, and they unanimously endorsed this rezone. Miss Ott from the Spenard Community Council was not in support of it. I don't know if she quite understood. She was concerned about the residential units being lost, and I'm not sure if she completely understood how we were trying to address that by having the 32 dwelling unit per acre requirement on the interior 2 acres.
Thanks. Yeah, I think some of us were confused by that. So I appreciate you explaining that to us. All right, seeing no further discussion, then I believe this will be before us at our next regular assembly meeting. So looking forward to the deliberation then. With that, thank you, Mr. Whitfield, Ms. Wong, and Mr. Debenham. I will go ahead and close this work session. Have a good weekend, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.